At the age of 26, Violet Firth had not yet found her calling in life, a sentiment to which no few of us can relate. At the dawn of the 20th century, there were few options available to women, and so young Violet faltered, turning from horticulture to the then new field of psychology. But, as with all new fields, psychology at the time met with little success. Psychology, more than a century later, will still sometimes meet with little success. This was disheartening. But a peculiar case, fictionalized in the story Bloodlust, involving what has only been identified as a vampirism, brought her into the path of a man fictionalized as Dr. John Richard Taverner. It was through stories of this man and his peculiar nursing home that Dion Fortune was introduced to the world, and, as she wrote in the introduction to the serialization of those stories, without Dr. Taverner, there would have been no Dion Fortune. The format of the Dr. Taverner stories is similar to that of Sherlock Holmes, assuming one removed all of the drugs, a sign of the dark side of occultism, of course, and featured a psychologist rather than a detective. But the narrator, a psychologist named Dr. Eric Rhodes, just back from the wars, like a certain other doctor, is introduced to a mysterious man with unusual methods of solving mysteries, and his perspective is open to a new world as a result. The final story of the Dr. Taverner series has Rhodes realize, "When I was with Taverner, my mind seemed to move slowly and clumsily by comparison with us, but by comparison with these men, my mind moved with a lightning speed and lucidity." A son of the night. The real name of Dr. Taverner was Theodore Moriarty, an Irishman by birth and by his every action if history is to be believed. Even when sojourning in Africa to recover from a bout of tuberculosis, Moriarty remained an Irishman. He took to sea at a young age and was there introduced to philosophy, in which he took a keen interest, and later studied in Dublin, then Heidelberg, or so he claimed. While Moriarty, when considered by the lofty annals of history, is often titled Dr. Moriarty, and was known as such even in his own time, there is no record of him ever receiving a medical degree, nor even a Ph.D. Moriarty was most certainly an initiated Mason, and as Dion Fortune, by virtue of her sex, could never be admitted to that order, she wrote of it with an air of grandeur and mystery in her tales of Dr. Taverner. Moriarty was a charismatic gentleman, and earned the favor of the 3 daughters of Francis Allen, who among them supported the occult leader and provided the means for him to teach and lecture between a triad of venues that, combined, became the fictitious nursing home of Dr. Taverner. Fortune herself was not held in high esteem by the students of Moriarty. It was perceived she put herself forward too much and thought too highly of herself as far as it came to Moriarty. In 1919 and 20, Fortune served in the office of junior warden for Moriarty's Theosophical group, which operated outside of Masonry. Later, she transferred her studies to the Order of the Golden Dawn and then the Alpha et Omega, until a falling out with Moynham MacGregor Mathers. But following Moriarty's death of a heart attack, she returned to his group. She put herself forward as an heir to his teachings, but was rebuffed. Instead, the group faded into the mists of history, and Moriarty himself seems almost a footnote. Fortune would write of the fictionalized accounts of her mentor. They may be regarded as fiction, or they may be considered to be what they actually are, studies in little-known aspects of psychology put in the form of fiction, because, if published as a serious contribution to science, they would have no chance of a hearing. And they do seem absurd, tales of vampirism, people born with elven heritages, souls exchanging bodies, and the calls of soulmates throughout the ages. But some of these are accounted in other works by Fortune with less embellishment, chief among them being Psychic Self-Defense, which has many accounts from her time with Moriarty. So while these stories are, it seems, fraught with exaggeration, there may yet be truth to be found within them. One of the most prominent beliefs in occultism in general is that of reincarnation. The soul travels through lifetime after lifetime, learning new lessons and seeking evolution in the light, ultimately seeking initiation, for the occultist believes all souls are destined to join that lofty society. At the end of each life, the scales are balanced. The soul meets purgatory by paying out the debts it owes the universe, and the lesser heaven by receiving the rewards the universe owes it. And then it passes to the next life. But a soul can be bound to another, often because of occult initiation, but also through a debt. This is the case in the tale of The Soul That Would Not Be Born. Mona Cayley was born to wealth and privilege, but, like everybody who is born, The soul sees a cinematograph film, as it were, of its future life, not all the details, but the broad outlines which are determined by its fate. Mona saw what was to befall her, brought about by her actions as an Italian Renaissance noblewoman, where she sent her beloved to a traitor's death to secure a more profitable marriage, and refused to accept her fate. So she acted as an infant in a woman's body as she grew, refusing to grow in soul or intellect. Until that betrayal she had been an initiate, but she had sacrificed it for greed and pride. In this life she remained in her childlike state, until a man recovering from shell shock sought her for protection. Karma being what it is, that man was none other than the reincarnation of the man she had sent to his death, the man whose soul was bound to hers, and to whom she owed a great debt. But he was engaged to another, and though by recognizing this man Mona began to accept her own soul and dawning intellect, the intellect of an initiate, she knew they could not be together. Not, as Taverner mused, in this life, but he knew that when the man's death came, it would be Mona to whom his mind turned, and she would be waiting for him at death's door, and the growth of their twinned souls could at last continue. The most fascinating tales found in the secrets of Dr. Taverner are the two dealing with people who are not quite human, but harken back to the days when the fair folk, the elven kind, walked the Isle of Britain. The first is the appropriately titled A Daughter of Pan, which focuses on the young woman Diana, a girl of perhaps 18 who acts with an animalistic youth and an almost bestial personality. A side character is the suicidal depressant tenant, who, it is mentioned in passing, has the tufted ears one might find on Robin Goodfellow. Diana's first action upon exploring the nursing home, after establishing how to find food, is to burn all of her clothing, stating simply, "They are not me." Thus Taverner allows her to dress in the costume of Puck, a tunic and leggings of green, which she wears continuously throughout the story, despite wear and tear. Diana's behavior is almost that of a dog, and Taverner describes her as Rhodes's dog at one point in the story, but also states that Diana is not human enough to fall in love with Rhodes. But Diana is not alone in her connection to nature. When Tennant, the depressant, plays a truly odd melody on a strangely tuned violin, he wakens spring in the dead of winter. Frost lay white upon the grass, and the bleak March wind cut keenly, but the air was full of the odor of flowers, with an undercurrent of sun-warmed pine woods. Something stirred in the shadow of the creepers, and a huge hare shot past us with a scurry of gravel and gained the shelter of the shrubbery. On the evening of the vernal equinox, Diana, followed by Rhodes and Taverner, leaves the nursing home for the forest, and there meets them, who, based on Rhodes's description and Diana's drawings, must be the old fairy folk. Rhodes describes them as furry snouts on human faces, clawed paws on human limbs, green, vine-like hair falling over flashing eyes that gleamed as green, and here and there half-frightened but half-fascinated human faces, some hanging back, though lured along, others given themselves up to the flight in a wild abandonment of glamour. Diana's drawings include creatures like winged fairies or dryads, as well as things Rhodes describes as demons, but all of them could likely be lumped under the field of elves. Elven lore has a wide variety of subsets. That is a subject for folklore, though, and likely for another time. But Diana stayed with them for several days, and kept returning to them, telling Taverner, "But then you see, they are my people. I have always belonged to them, but I did not know it, and now they have found me." And so she spent her months at the nursing home, coming and going from her people, returning when she was hungry only to leave again, until she met Tennant one afternoon when Rhodes was taking him on a walk. Tennant was not even primitive, he was pre-Adamic. As for Diana, she was no daughter of Eve, but of the dark Lilith who preceded her, and I realized that those two were of the same world and belonged to each other. The two, to the chagrin of both families, were wed out of the nursing home, and took to a life camping in the wilderness. Rhodes was invited to the birthing of their first child a year later, but it required little effort on his part, nature taking care of her own. The second story concerning a character of elven heritage is the final Dr. Taverner story, A Son of the Night. This is probably the most important story in the series, not because of the suspiciously elf-like character, but Marius, Earl of Cullen, is where the story begins. His mother, the Countess of Cullen, and two of her children, connive to have Dr. Taverner certify Marius insane to gain control of the land he refuses to sell, or he claims, take the land from me, take me from the land, and I tell you it will not live, and neither shall I. And indeed he has the superstition of his tenants on his side. Some will only plough their fields if Marius leads the team, or have him cut the first hay, and he consorts with the farmers and common folk rather than his own class. Taverner first gains his trust by claiming he knows Marius's people, for they are his own people, the lordly ones, in the hills, in the hollow hills. He also allows Marius to come and go as he wills, and, rather than treating Marius as a patient, puts Marius in charge of a patient, Rhodes. Of Rhodes, Marius says that he has also got a soul, though he doesn't know it. But I will give his soul to him and make him know that it is his own, and then he will live even as you and I live. Rhodes begins to feel jealous of Marius, who, despite his eccentricity, has an intellect to match Taverner's, for he, too, has the soul of an initiate. Taverner has a way of attracting them, does he not? Rhodes muses that they both came from the same spiritual place in the hinterland of the subconscious, but in one the scientist and in the other the artist predominated. But Taverner had saved his soul by masking it, whereas Marius had very nearly lost his by exposing it to vulgar eyes. Rhodes, after a season spent with Marius following all the time spent with Taverner, was able to escape the nursing home for a medical conference in London, a welcome reprieve, or so Rhodes believed. He thought he would be comfortable with men like himself, but instead he found he had advanced beyond their plane. He was not on the level of Taverner, true, but he had progressed beyond common man, as per the quote at the beginning of the century. Rhodes knew he did not see with the clairvoyance of such men as Marius and Taverner, but he was ready for something more. I knew I could enter into no relationship outside the strange, unorganized brotherhood of those who follow the secret path, and yet I was not of these either. An invisible barrier shut me off from them also, and I could not enter into their life. Rhodes had discovered he knew more than the common level of man. When he was freed from the conference for dinner, he found his thoughts turning to Taverner's strange fraternity and all he knew of it and others like it. His values have changed. His focus in life has changed. He is no longer the man he was before meeting Taverner, as Dion Fortune was no longer the same Violet Firth who had not yet met Theodore Moriarty. So, over dinner, over a simple meal, Rhodes tries to decide if he is ready to embrace the world as Taverner experiences it. Those who enter the unseen never really return, and unless I could find companionship in the place where I had gone, I should pass my life in spiritual solitude, with a terrible nostalgia of the soul for the bright places I had glimpsed. So should Rhodes abandon the spiritual evolution he knew could await him out of fear of loneliness, and stay at the evolutionary level of the bulk of man out of comfort and the ease of the journey? But, like Fortune, and perhaps like all true occultists, Rhodes realizes there was no decision. The decision had already been made, perhaps without his realizing it. I knew that, isolated though I must always be in the world of men, I had this infinite companionship all about me. I was no longer alone, for, like Taverner, Marius, and many others, I had passed over into the unseen. I've said before that Fortune's fictional work can place the novice on the path of the initiate. If one follows the tales of Dr. Rhodes and Dr. Taverner, and in this entry I've summarized only a few, one can see how a man with absolutely no knowledge of the unseen world has been granted the keys to the path of the spiritual, and, one would deduce, entry into a fraternity of the right-hand path. While the ultimate fate of Rhodes is unknown, that of Dion Fortune is a matter of public record, thanks to the biographies of Gareth Knight and Alan Richardson. And since Rhodes is a placeholder for Fortune herself, he would have become a master occultist and a true representative of the light.